All right, and we're rolling.
And welcome to today's CD office hours for ESG. My name is Anthony Zepeda, and I will be your moderator for today's session. We're going to hold for just a minute more for more of our colleagues to join us as we make this transition back from the joint office hours to the ESG office hours only. In the meantime, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and the region you represent, and we will begin in about 60 seconds. All right, good to see everyone logging in there. Everyone successfully got the link and are here today. That's great news. We'll wait about 30 more seconds. Oh, Ventura County, Felipe, I wish I was there right now. Though my background, it makes it kind of look like we're there right now. All right, I think we are ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's Office Hours for ESG. My name is Anthony Zepeda. I am today's moderator. Uh, if you're just joining us, please join your colleagues in the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. A couple of our standard housekeeping reminders that this office hours session is being recorded for public record. We are recording it right now. And the second is that HCD policy does not allow AI note takers in public meetings. Yes, I know. We're probably way behind the curve already on that, aren't we? But in the meantime, please disable your AI note taker as we are required to remove any AI note takers from the meeting. You'll have to relog. We'll have to kick you out. You'll have to relog in without your AI. And with that, let's go to slide 2 and cover the basic housekeeping items that we always do each month. All questions. Well, let's have a topic for it. How to submit a question. All your questions must be submitted in the question box. And when you do so, please type your organization and question into the box. Our team will read those questions out loud at different points in the presentation, and we will do our best to provide answers throughout the presentation, both in the Q&A box. If we can answer it there, we'll answer it there. If not, we will address it verbally at the end. Alongside our presenters today, we have our entire ESG team. We've got our specialist representatives, we've got management, and executive leadership. We are all here today to help you out during the Q&A sessions. So once again, just put your questions in the Q&A box. Try and keep them out of the chat. I know that it's chat. You want to put them in there, but they tend to get lost in there, and we want to make sure we address all of your questions. And if they get in the chat, we have a hard time tracking them. And let's go to the next slide, please. So as mentioned, we're recording this today, and both the slides and the recording will be available on the ESG webpage within approximately 2 to 3 weeks from the date of today's session. Next slide, please. For today's agenda, as we have our inaugural fiscal year 26-27 return to standalone ESG office hours, we're going to have a very brief updates slide. And then we're going to discuss the 2025 standard agreements, which are just getting ready to roll. And then we're going to open the floor to questions and feedback. And we would love to hear from you, especially in terms of questions you may have regarding the standard agreements or the expenditure deadlines, which we'll be covering, or if you want to provide any feedback that can help us present this information each month in a way that is much more accessible for you and understandable. And let's go to the next slide, please. So here's our updates. Yay! ESG office hours. We have returned to Wednesdays. and more specifically, the third Wednesday of each month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. You should have all received a new registration link. If you're here today, odds are that you have received the link. However, if you need the new link, let's go to the next slide. There it is. There is the registration link for the entire fiscal year 26-27 office hours Zoom registration. And it is also in the chat. I dropped it in the chat. Should be at the very top before we got started. So you would have that. If you need to add staff, if someone new comes in that you want to give information about the office hours, you can share that link. They can register and they can attend. They will get an invitation from Zoom, and then it'll be on your calendar for the next year ahead. You can also reach out to your ESG grant representative or the NOFA inbox if you would like us to send you the registration link, but it's in the chat. It's going to be in the slides, and we'll make sure we cover those bases. Well, let's go to the next slide, please. And speaking of reaching out to your grant representatives, there they are. The team, our team of champions there. They handle a lot of grantees and they handle a lot of questions and RFFs, and they do an outstanding job of it. We have Sam Liu, Giovanni Martinez, and Ryan Un. If for some reason we are all on vacation somewhere or out of the office that day, you can always shoot an email to the ESG NOFA inbox, which is monitored Monday through Friday during normal business hours. And we generally will get back to you within 24 hours. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer if it's a very complex question, but we will always notify you if it's going to be a delay. And the address is right there at the bottom. And so let's go to the next slide. Okay, probably the easiest part of the day. Are there any questions regarding the updates? You can submit them in the Q&A box. And we'll give that about 30 seconds. If there's anything there already, I'm sure
There's
Amanda.
nothing in there right now.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward updates today. Just new Zoom registration. Office hours have returned to Wednesdays, standalone ESG office hours, third Wednesday of the month, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. We'll be doing that all the way in the next fiscal year, unless some other opportunity comes up where we can partner with one of our divisions within HCD, like we did with the HPD. All right, let's go ahead and get started on today's topic, which is the Spotlight series for today is the ESG 2025 Standard Agreement. So, okay, we're going to talk about the ESG 25 Standard Agreement. However, the title, it's a bit of a misnomer, as today's discussion includes a lot of 2024 Standard Agreement discussion. It's about 50% 2024 and 50% 2025. But I didn't want to send something out that said ESG 2024, 2025 standard agreements, because that could be confusing in this first year of multi-year contracts. I want to keep it separate in our own minds and also for our grantees. It helps us, things can get a little murky. So this is illustrated on the next slide. So next slide, please. So this is an overview of what we're going to discuss today. And, as you can see, it's pretty much the same thing, just different years. We're going to be looking at for 2024, we're going to start at there, and we're going to be looking at closing out the 2024 ESG standard agreements. We're going to look at dates and deadlines, and we're going to provide some suggestions for spending down your 2024 allocation if you need that assistance. And then we're going to jump into 2025 ESG standard agreements. And we're going to look at dates and deadlines. And we're going to provide some assistance with spending down your 2025 allocation. So it's pretty much the same information. It's just we're going to have different expenditure requirement dates, specific requirement dates for each funding year. So with that, let's jump right in with the 2024 standard agreement expenditure deadlines, which is the next slide. All right, there they are. These are in, I believe it's Exhibit F of your standard agreement for 2024 ESG funds. The expenditure deadline for 75% of your total award is, boy, it's just around the corner. Just is that about 8 days away? August 27th, 2026. So by the 27th, is outlined in your standard agreement that your agency needs to be at 75% or more of the total award. The expenditure deadline, the final deadline for incurring costs for 2024 ESG funds, is September 25th, 2026. It's just right around the corner. And as mentioned, that's the last day for incurring eligible costs for the 2024 funding year. The final day to submit an RFF for the 2024 funding year is October 25th, 2026. And just want to be clear, most of you have worked with ESG grants before, you're very familiar with them. But in case you're new and this might not be as clear, these dates, the expenditure deadline of September 25th of this year, a little over a month away, that is the last day that you can be reimbursed for eligible ESG costs for the 2024 funding allocation. Once you have incurred all those costs and you want to submit your final request for funding, that day is October 25th, 2026. And so with that, let's go to the next slide. And this slide is just a brief overview of the process for submitting that final RFF. You are welcome to submit that prior to October 25th. And we would encourage that. And some of you have already closed out your grants for 2024. But if you have not, here are the steps. You're going to submit your final RFF. You're going to include a signed certificate of completion. And to get one of those, please reach out to your rep or the NOFA inbox. You'll need to submit the signed completed certificate of completion with your RFF when you submit those in eCivis. Along with that, you'll have your final RFF, your final DER, detailed expense report, and the appropriate supporting documentation for all eligible expenditures through the closing date or the final expenditure date of September 25th. And you will submit that in eCivis, and your grant representative will then process that RFF and notify your agency of the next steps for the grant closeout. As you can see, they're highlighted in the bottom in yellow. We're first year of our multi-year contract. We're transitioning from 2024 funds to the 2025 allocation. And this is a reminder that your agency must expend all of your 2024 funds prior to submitting an RFF for the 2025 funds. So just kind of to restate that, your agency is required to expend all of your 2024 funds prior to submitting an RFF for the 2025 funds. I'm going to introduce a couple of related points because that may trigger some questions. I want to introduce those now, but we are going to be discussing these in detail in the upcoming slides. If you're unable to spend down all of your remaining 2024 funds, we touched on this last month, reach out to your grant representative for assistance. We can provide assistance in terms of guidance. We might be able to spend those funds down, or if there's just no way that your agency is going to do it, we'll discuss the recapture process with you and get that ball rolling. We're going to discuss, as I mentioned, recapture in just a couple slides, but I wanted to bring that to your attention. The second point that we want to make on this is for 2025 funds, not 2024, for 2025 funds, the year ahead. Grantees, you should be well into incurring costs for those funds, the 2025 funds already, as the date for when you could start incurring costs was March 17th, 2025. However, you cannot submit an RFF until you've expended all of your funds. So I'm hoping that is clear, that you should be well into incurring costs, but you just haven't sought reimbursement yet because you can't do that until we close out the 2024. And I'm going to pause right there real quick. And I just want to reach out to my team, Tim, Tuesday, Amanda, the reps. Did I miss anything there, or do you think that something wasn't as clear that you'd like to add on there?
That sounded spot on to me.
Agreed. Yes. Thank you, Tuesday.
Okay, great. Thank you. And with that, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. I mentioned that for each year, we're going to go over the expenditure dates, and then we're going to look at some ways to help you spend the funds. And so we're still in 2024. We haven't moved to 2025 yet. So closing out your 2024 contracts, here are a few, some of the best practices for closing out your 2024 contract and expending those funds by the expenditure deadline. These are things that we hear every year from grantees, best practices, and things that we encounter ourselves and find that they're very helpful. For your particular situation that your agency may have more specific needs, you can reach out to your grant representative. They can work with you, or they can pull in Tuesday, myself, Amanda, Tim, and we might be able to assist as well. But in general, here are some of the best ways to do that. Remember, you can incur costs as of your award letter date, all the way back when you got your award letter. Whatever the date is on that, that is when you can have costs, eligible costs for ESG. You can incur costs, submit an RFF for those costs. Some of those general examples include staff costs, training, services provided, rental arrears, housing search and placement, legal services, janitorial in terms of maintenance, for emergency shelter or something along those lines, or even I could have Tuesday jump in if it is for also, I believe, rapid rehousing as well. You can also look at operating costs, overhead costs, either direct or indirect costs. Once again, Tuesday's our expert on that. We will probably loop her in if you need some guidance on that. And let's go to the next slide. And this isn't a pretty slide at all. I have two slides in this presentation that I just grabbed from PDFs. And they never just really go that well on the screen, but it does get the point across. This is an example of rapid rehousing. And these are some of the activities that you can incur eligible costs for. And reading left to right, we've got the eligible costs. We've got short-term rental assistance, medium-term rental arrears. And then going to the middle, we've got financial assistance, application fees, security deposits, utility deposits, moving costs. And to the far right, we've got eligible costs for services, which might be housing search and placement, stability case management, mediation, legal services, and credit repair. And I'm going to stop right there and let Tuesday jump in, or Tim jump in, or Amanda, if there's anything there that you'd like to add. I know we had a discussion on this earlier this week.
We have one good question. Oh, we have one good question in the chat, Anthony.
Yeah.
Can you please expand on training? What type is eligible? I'm going to do this in two parts. So that was the first question. And the training is very specific in the federal regs for ESG. It has to be HUD approved training. So unfortunately, a lot of training is not an eligible expense under ESG. I have not seen very many trainings that have been reimbursed unless they're HUD approved trainings. And then the second part of the question, janitorial services, can these be for headquarters / location of staff delivering rapid rehousing services, for example? And the answer to that is yes. But if you are doing rapid rehousing for multiple different programs, so if you have a HAP grant and an ESG grant, for example, you would have to split that like 50-50 between the two grants. If you have three grants doing rapid rehousing, you would have to split it in thirds. And that is only for the cubicle space or the office space that is providing rapid rehousing. If you have a large headquarter office that has like multiple different programs running out of it, you have to divide the building up by only the rapid rehousing area. It is very specific. So if you're giving us a janitorial service and it's for the entire building, that's going to be a red flag for us. So just be aware, those are both great questions, but they are very specific in the regulations. Go ahead, Anthony. That was it.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. And
Oh,
so as
I
Amanda knows,
I
go
did
ahead,
want to
Peter.
add that we can do things for training that is client specific. So some of the training that we're talking about in these notes are training for your participants, your clients, and you can do things like job training and that kind of stuff. And those are allowable costs. And I would also say that when you're looking at costs that, for your office space, you would look at dividing your cost amounts by about the same amount that you are using the space. So if your rent amount is being split up and you're claiming one third of your rent for ESG rapid rehousing, then your janitorial would be split up in that same one third. If it's one fifth, it would be one fifth. And those are things that you can take as overhead costs that are direct costs if you're able uh, to quantify those costs.
Thank you, Tuesday. That's very helpful. Anyone else want to jump in? Are we good? I think we're good. Okay, so that those questions, especially the ones that Amanda had, the two-parter, it illustrates very well that we can provide the general guidance in office hours, but oftentimes for your particular agency, it might be a very specific question, and that's going to require a little more discussion, a little more back and forth, and that's why we recommend reach out to your grant rep as soon as you can and with your questions, and then we can provide the guidance for your specific agency to help you expend these funds in your community and keep the ball rolling. All right, let's go to the next slide. So the takeaways for 2024 are going to transition right into 2025, which we're about to do. The expenditure deadline is September 25th. That is the last day that you can incur eligible costs for 2024 ESG funds. Once you've incurred all those costs and you want to submit your final RFF to close the grant out and begin spending that or submitting reimbursements for the 2025, that date is approximately a month later, or right on a month later, 10/25/26, October 25/26, just before Halloween. Make sure to include your certificate of completion for year one, since we are now in a multi-year contract situation. It is only going to be for year one. We're not going to close out the entire grant, just year one, 2024. And that final reminder, we're really hitting on this today because we want you to be aware of it. Expend all of your 2024 funds prior to submitting a reimbursement request for 2025 funds. And with that, let's go ahead and move to a related topic that we introduced last month. Next slide, please. ESG agreement. What we have on the slide here is from the ESG guidelines for the state of California, the recapture policy, which states, I'll be boring, I'm going to read from the screen, that the ESG funds shall be dispersed pursuant to the terms of the standard agreement, and the department, which is HCD, will require the first RFF be submitted within 120 days from the date of the standard agreement execution. We're going to touch on that in a couple slides. Subsequent RFS must be submitted no less than quarterly. Touch on that as well. But the real gist of this little snippet from the guidelines is that funds not drawn in a timely manner may be recaptured and reallocated as described in your standard agreement. And next slide, please. And this is what it's going to look like in your standard agreement. This is a snippet. And you can see where it outlines the expenditure deadline, the 75%, the 100%, and then maximum recapture. This is more specific, and it identifies the amount that HCD will recapture and reallocate. And let's go ahead to the next slide. And this is the actual process. As mentioned, this is a rehash of last month, but we want to keep bringing this reminder up on a regular basis for our grantees, especially as we end one contract and move into the next funding year. The policy is we have reached out to our grantees at risk of not meeting expenditure deadlines and the requirements as we get closer and closer to that 75 and 100% deadline. And the grant representatives are going to work with the grantees to get these funds expended in a timely manner. We're going to see how much we can get expended without having to do the recapture policy. But if it is just your agency knows there is no way you're going to be able to expend the funds prior to the deadlines, your grant representative will work with the ESG team to determine the percentage of the funds that need to be recaptured. We will reduce your grantee award and amend the standard agreement to reflect the new amount, and we will begin that process. We want to begin that process as soon as possible with your agency. So please keep in touch with your grant rep so we can keep it, up to date in terms of whether we need to recapture or if it's just a case of maybe looking at more creative ways to expend the funds. And so let's go ahead to the next slide. All right, another questions slide. Because we know these topics can be a little confusing. Recapture is new for a lot of grantees. You're not familiar with it. And so we want to take a moment here. If you have a question on what we just covered, go ahead and enter that into the Q&A box. And we'll give it about a minute here to see if we have anything and if anything pops up.
Doesn't look like we have any questions right now.
Okay. Well, this isn't the only time you can ask. So don't worry, we will be able to answer questions throughout this and also at the end. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, 2025 contracts. Very similar to what we just covered for 2024. So we will be looking at a slide just like this in 1 year from today, and as we move from 25 to 26. So we're laying the groundwork now. We're letting you know of the expenditure requirements, the deadlines, and the processes that are involved if an agency is unable to meet those deadlines, or if you need assistance. We're really here at HCD. We're not about, well, you're not spending your money, and coming down real hard. We want to deploy that money in your community. Our mission as an agency is deploy these funds in your community to address the needs of the homeless and the needs that your agency addresses regarding homelessness. So with that, let's just jump right into 2025 standard agreements. We're spending year 2 funds, and those funds those costs can be incurred as of March 17, 2026. So you've had a few months to be expending those funds, and we're hoping that you've just got a bunch of RFFs and DERs and supporting documentations just waiting for your 24 grant to be closed out, and we can start processing that money, get it deployed in your community. The expenditure deadline for 75% of your total award is in March of 2027. What is that, about September, October, November, December, January, February? About 6 months from now. So 6 months from now, you should be at 75% of your total award. You should have that spent down. And that's fast. We know that's fast. And these are the parameters we operate under with HUD, and we're held to the same expenditure deadline as you. That comes from HUD to us. We then transfer that to you. We want to make sure that we expend those funds within the contract window period that we have with HUD. And that way we can continue getting those allocations and standard allocations sent to our communities here in California without any issues with HUD. The expenditure deadline for 100% of your total award is a little over a year from today. That is the last day that you can incur cost for these 2025 funds and all eligible costs through September 23rd, 2027. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is from the standard agreements that you all have for your 2025 funding year, Exhibit F. And once again, this is one of those PDFs, not that pretty, but it works. It gets what we're trying to convey across very well. It's the 75% of your total award. The recapture language, once again, is there, identifying the percentage of your total award if you're unable to expend those funds. But we're going to think positive right now, and we're not going to worry about that. And then the expenditure deadline, and the last day for the request for reimbursements is October 23rd, 2027. And then once again, maximum recapture amount. And let's go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, it's pretty much the same information. We're just moving it forward now to the dates for the 2025. Same process though. And the expenditure deadlines, the RFF submission deadlines, the milestones that are identified in your standard agreement. We would highly recommend that your finance team and your grant management team stay on top of those to ensure that you're meeting those requirements, and as it will have an effect in terms of recapture, possible recapture, and reallocation of your funds, and also in terms of monitoring for the next fiscal year. That would be a ding if an agency doesn't spend their funds. That's a ding, and which will make you a little more likely to be monitored that year. This slide, we're looking at RFS, request for fundings. As mentioned before, the final RFF submittal date is October 23rd, 2027. We've said this 3 or 4 times, but really want to make sure you know. Expending funds, as of March 17, 2026, you can be incurring cost on the 2025 funds. One thing that we are going to discuss at every office hours from here on out is RFF submittal. In the past, RFFs with the ESG program were, there wasn't necessarily a set schedule. And if there was a set schedule, it wasn't really a hard deadline. There's a lot of leeway in terms of when you submitted your RFFs, your agency submits your RFFs. And oftentimes we would get an RFF from an agency, one RFF at the end of the year for the entire fiscal year. And boy, that was an RFF. Those were huge. But as stated in your standard agreement, in the guidelines, and in the guidelines as well, RFFs must be submitted quarterly at minimum. We recommend monthly, but at minimum, all agencies receiving ESG funds here in California must be submitting quarterly. That's standard quarterly measurements, every 3 months from the date of the contract. And as mentioned before, it's going to tie in. We are going to be starting in the 4th quarter of this year. HCD ESG is going to be presenting and submitting COC quarterly reporting, where we will send a report to the local COC, letting them know the percentage spent of their award. And if they sub-award to grantees, we're going to let them know how those grantees are doing. It is a way of keeping track of where we are at with these expenditure milestones moving forward. and also keeping the COC up to date for the grantees for the following year when they're going to be, they may be recommending new grantees. If a grantee can't keep up, the COCs and HCD may end up working in conjunction in terms of establishing processes and standards for submitting RFS and spending your funding on time and meeting expenditure milestones identified in standard agreements. And as mentioned before, monitoring as well. We've ramped back up. Kickback sounds too casual. We've ramped back up the annual monitoring program here. We've already begun monitoring this year, the 2024 grants. If you haven't heard from us, don't worry. That means you're not getting monitored so far this year. But moving forward, whenever we do a risk assessment to identify grantees that will be monitored in a particular calendar year, this is going to be big on that list. Are they submitting RFFs on time in a timely manner as identified in their standard agreement? So just a heads up, it's something that we're not trying to come across as heavies, but at the same time, we want you to be aware that as the federal government becomes a little more strict with the states with funding and meeting expenditure milestones and expending the money that goes to the state, we have to do so as well. So we want to make sure that you're aware that we are looking at the standard agreement. We are looking at the RFF submittals on time in a timely manner, and we will be reporting on that on a quarterly basis. So next slide, please. All right. So 2025, this is your last moment for questions. The last point in the presentation as we're wrapping up here. So if you have any questions, give it about a minute. You can go ahead and enter those. And Savannah's right there.
We have two questions. Well, now we have three. So Tuesday's going to take this first question.
Sorry. Yeah, we had somebody who reached out and asked about the AB 12, which is the regulation that came out in the state of California last year that restricted how much landlords can collect for both whether or not they can collect last month's rent and how much security deposit they can collect. And they wanted to know if that was the case for our program. And my answer to that is that there's nuances to who can and cannot collect last month's rent and how much security deposit they can. Some of the smaller landlords who only own a certain number of properties are still able to collect 2 months, up to 2 months rent for security deposit. And so it's nuanced, and our federal regulations allow for us to pay first, last, and security deposits up to 2 times rent, and we still allow that. It's just a matter of whether or not the landlord is allowed to ask for that, and we're not going to know that but the landlord does need to let you know whether or not they're allowed to. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Tuesday. So the next question is, wasn't there a 50% expenditure deadline of September 23rd, 2026? And the answer to that is yes, there was, but we are foregoing that because we realize that the 2024 funds expire when the 2025 funds will just be starting. So we realize there's a conflict there, and we're trying to help you all out by foregoing that 50% milestone. If I said that wrong, let me know, Tim. And the next question is, will the first DER RFF for year 2 be subject to full monitoring of all expenses? And that means with backup documentation. And the answer is yes. And then have subsequent RFFs include selected activities? And the answer is yes. Anytime we have a new fiscal year funds, the first RFF will always be subject to full monitoring with full backup. And that's it, Anthony.
All right, Amanda, thank you. Those are great questions. Go ahead, Tuesday.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a different answer a little bit. The way we're doing our RFFs DERs with the second year funding is we're actually continuing the number of of the RFF. So you're going to be going, if you've already submitted 4 RFFs, your first 25 funding is actually going to be RFF 5. So it's not a first RFF, and we are actually going to be doing spot monitoring the same way, or this line item monitoring the same way we've been doing for subsequent uh, request for funds for the 24. So it's considered a continuation. We have a few situations where some of our grantees will be having their first RFF with 25 funding, and they would be having full monitoring. So we're not considering your first request for funds for your 25 funding as a first request. So
Great. Thank you, Tuesday. That is definitely a point I will make sure to include in next month's session as we'll be getting ready to start receiving those first RFFs about a month later. So
and
we will definitely go over that next month. Go ahead, Tuesday.
I was just going to say, people have been doing so marvelously well with their supporting documentation that that was one of the things that, as our team has leadership teams have been getting together talking about it, that we felt that the continued programs were doing and the past programs had been doing so well that we could just consider it a continuation. And everybody's just been doing such an excellent job with that.
Thank you, Tuesday. And yes, I would have to agree that we've been getting great cooperation, and our grantees are picking up fast. Just to let you guys know, you really are. You've taken a lot of information. We know this is a little grant that has extensive regulation, federal and state regulation, and it can be difficult at times. And so we appreciate your patience, and we also appreciate how well you adapt to the changes as they come along. And it makes our jobs a lot smoother. It makes it easier for us to get these funds into your community to address your homeless issues. And with that, I think we'll go to the next slide. All right, we're going to introduce in office hours as we're now the standalone ESG again. Each month, we're going to have a little monitoring moment just to keep monitoring top of mind for our grantees and their subs and all of your service providers. Just a reminder that here's the big picture of monitoring. If you're going down from the top side, HUD has monitoring, auditing, and oversight of California HCD. So we are monitored just like you are. And we're monitored by HUD. They look at our client files, they look at our DERs, they look at our process. For all of our grantees, or some of them, it might be a spot monitoring, but they do so. And we are then required, as per federal statute, we have to monitor and provide oversight of our grantees. Our grantees are then required by the same federal statute to monitor and provide oversight of their subrecipients and service providers. And then the subrecipient service providers, their role is the local program implementation. And then, just this would probably be better served as a circular, but if you move to the right, it is the reporting then goes back up. The reporting from the subrecipients to the grantees, the reporting from the grantees to HCD, and the reporting from HCD to HUD Office of the Inspector General. So just wanted to have this little monitoring moment to remind you that that's ongoing. That's for 2024. That's for 2025. That's a regular requirement of the ESG grant. And with that, let's go to the next slide. So we want to thank you. We love working with our grantees. You guys do an outstanding job, and we appreciate your participation, especially your feedback. We want to make sure that the information that we're presenting, that we deliver it in a way that's accessible for your agency and for your subrecipients, and address the issues here in California regarding homelessness. For more information on our program, you can always email the ESG NOFA inbox. Next slide, please. So here's a little resource slide. Probably probably just mix this up every month, but I wanted to highlight this month the ESG webpage. We've put a lot of work into the ESG webpage over the last year and really completely overhauled it in the past 2 years. It is just a great resource for everything ESG. You can get down to just the very specific nitty gritties of an activity component like emergency shelter, or you can look at the more general regulations. For this month, I wanted to highlight the first link is the ESG webpage. The second link is policies and resources, a very comprehensive page with specific policies for each ESG component and resources to help you implement those components. Checklist, client file checklist. If you're not sure how to do a client file, it is right there. And the bottom link is for office hours and training. You click on that and you can go back and look at the archive of the office hours and trainings that we have provided over the last few years. It also links you to the ESG HCD YouTube page, which I think goes back even farther in terms of the trainings that we provided. So just going to call that out. Each month we'll provide a new set of resources for you, and just to make sure that you have all the tools you need to implement this program in your community. Next slide, please. And as always, we've got the social media side. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on X. I think it's still called that. You can even follow us on LinkedIn. And next slide, please. So we hope you have a great Wednesday. We're almost over the hump, almost towards the weekend. Our next office hour session is Wednesday, September 16th, 2026, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m.
We have sorry to interrupt. We have a raised hand.
Okay, let's see. Let's see, Jim. Do you know how to?
Yeah, I did.
So Chris has got a question. Go ahead, Chris. I think Gio's going to unmute you. Thought he was. Maybe it's not unmuting.
Yeah, I'll have to unmute. I've asked. What's going on?
All right, Chris, if you could
Oh.
go ahead.
Since I'm a sub for Stan County, they may or may not tell me to follow the sequential ordering of the RFFs.
If you're Chris, if you're new,
I'm a sub recipient.
Oh, okay, yeah, they're gonna work with you on that.
Okay.
You have a grant manager who's going to work with you through the process to double check all of your the RFF information. That includes the reporting period and the numbering. They're also going to be looking at your DER, detailed expense report, to ensure that the expenses are eligible and line up with the supporting documentation. And Tuesday, do you have anything else to add there?
Well, I was just going to say that in this case, Stanislaus is the entity that's responsible for submitting their RFF at our level, and they'll make sure that it's has the correct number, and we'll help them if it doesn't have the correct number. So
Okay, sounds
yes.
good. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Great, Chris. That was a great question, and welcome aboard. We look forward to working together. And with that, I think we are all finished. But I was going to mention that if you have any topics that you want to have us discuss or present, please shoot us an email to the NOFA inbox or to your grant representative. I have a feeling that my intuition is telling me that we are going to be discussing RFFs next week as well, at least somewhere in the presentation. I mean, next month. So until then, have a great day, and we will see you in September. Thank you.